Hello, everybody. Welcome to Film Family. And today we're going to be starting our new series for the decade. We're going to be doing some different movie genres and counting down our favorites of last decade, the 2010s. And then in the final video, we're going to be doing just our favorite out of all the movies, like a cumulative list. And today we're going to start with the animated movies of the 2010s. So obviously these are our lists, subjective opinions, not right in any sort of way, and we're just going to be counting down from our best to bestest. And yeah, it's animated movies last decade were pretty interesting because none of them seemed to ever be that interesting creatively. A lot of animated movies last decade were just sequels. A lot of the most successful ones and acclaimed ones were just kind of rehashes or retellings or just continuations of pre-established ones in the 2000s, which in my opinion was one of the juggernaut decades of animation. And you still got the big studios doing a lot of stuff, like from DreamWorks and Disney and Pixar and whatnot, but it was a decent decade. It feels like one of the most uneventful genres of the last decade, but we still got, some obviously great gems in there. So yeah, we're just going to get right into our list, go from the honorable mentions. So, Taj, do you have any honorable mentions?
I have two honorable mentions.
So many honorable mentions.
Ooh, you do. Big Hero 6, which I really enjoyed, but it did not make my top 10. And Zootopia were the two that I were on the cusp. More Big Hero 6, because I like the relationship, between...
Baymax.
Yeah, whatever you call it. And but also the lost factor of it as well, but yeah, those would be my two honorable mentions.
I have so many honorable mentions because I love cartoons. I'm not even going to say all of them, but I think some of the highlights is the Lorax. I don't think a lot of people talk about that.
Okay, didn't see
and
it.
I love Dr. Seuss's writing, and I think the movie did pretty good with it because it was still very fantastical. The Lego movie I actually thought was really good because I love Legos and what they did with it, with the everything is awesome. I thought that was really cool. And then Wreck-It Ralph. I thought that was well written and well done.
Okay.
Those are my honorable mentions.
Yeah, so I had How to Train Your Dragon 3, which came out last year, which I feel like flew under the radar. Last year was just kind of an uneventful year for animated movies. I had Kung Fu Panda 3, which I really wanted to make my list because
As an honorable mention,
I just
really?
love that trilogy, but it just missed it. And then, I had those two, and then Incredibles 2, which also missed my list. Just a solid sequel to the first one. The first one was definitely better, though. I feel like people say the second one's better. It's kind of crazy. But
It's close, though. It's
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I don't feel like I watched a lot of animation movies for some reason because the ones you guys said for honorable mentions are kind of up in my thing. But let's go with number 10. Number 10 for me, Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3, it's when you bring the band back together. I really, I love Toy Story. I love, I remember when the first Toy Story came out and what Pixar was doing. And, I didn't want them to change the formula. I didn't want anything to be changed in it. And, they still seem to surprise me. So this was an easy number 10 for me.
Our lists are going to be so different.
Oh,
It's
I could.
gonna be
All right,
crazy.
I just from your honorable mentions, our lists are going to be different. So, yeah. So Toy Story.
For me, my number 10 is Incredibles 2.
Okay.
Because it's hard, I think, especially when it comes to kids' movies and cartoons, to land a sequel or a trilogy or the movies past it. And a lot of people will run something good into the ground. As I was just saying, I think Incredibles 2 did a good job. It's not as good as the first, but I did like it a lot, and I thought it was a cool way to bring it back in for the generation that it came out with, so they could kind of enjoy it with their kids.
Yeah.
So I think it's a nice number 10 for me.
Okay.
Yeah, so for number 10 on my list, I have Wreck-It Ralph. Wreck-It Ralph is a really cool movie. It feels like one of those movies that really tried gimmicks, and when you have a decade that releases things like the Emoji Movie, it's refreshing to see something like Wreck-It Ralph that actually knows how to use its gimmick. The video game stuff is all really charming. If you play video games or you grew up doing like the classic era or just grew up playing them, you're going to have a great time in it. The voice cast is all really good. And I think my favorite thing about it was just the world it built. There's a sequel that came out in 2018, which was a solid follow-up, but it felt like it was trying to be more of a gimmick movie. Wreck-It Ralph never felt like it was pushing too hard, and in that, it really made just kind of a super simple, but just a really, I think, effective story. And it just had like just some really fun stuff in it. You know, it felt like very adventurous for an animated movie.
I just want to say before we continue, we're not doing the dishonorable mentions, and I didn't even see the Emoji Movie, but I was betting on it being one of the worst animated movies. Yeah. So I don't know.
Okay.
Number 9.
Number 9 for me was How to Train Your Dragon. I know that's
Which one?
The first one.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Which I know that's probably up there in your top 3s. But for me, I was trying to remember it, and I remember and that wasn't a good thing. That's why it went down the list because I was like, okay, I know I love the movie. I saw it in the theater. I love the relationship between, in terms of the trust factor in there. But I was just like, what else do I remember about the movie? I'm like, I can't give it a higher score if I don't really remember certain scenes and stuff like that. And so I had to give it. I had to be honest and give it, number 9.
So number 9 for me is a movie I feel like hasn't really been talked about, and I've only seen it really a couple of times. It's The Good Dinosaur. And I was a fan of the animation. I was a fan of the story. And the reason why it's on my list, too, is I have a fond memory of watching it with Dee Dee and JoJo when it came out.
Okay.
But the way in which it tells a story and it develops a relationship between the dinosaur and the caveman family, it was so emotional that at the end when it kind of came to an end because it's a natural order, I almost felt like crying. Yeah, JoJo was crying, and I was like, that's sad, man.
You're like, yeah.
So that's why it definitely had to be on my list.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah, so my number 9, I also actually have How to Train Your Dragon. Cool. It's a super sweet movie. It's some people say it deserved best animated feature over Toy Story 3. To those people, I say no, but it's still a really solid movie. It's kind of creative with its world. It's got a cool little Scandinavian vibe. But more than that, like Taj said, the relationship is just really likable. You see Toothless and Hiccup always talking and forming the relationship, and it develops throughout the other 2 movies, and it develops well, but it really set the foundation in this movie, and the other voice cast is cool. I feel like I didn't really like the last 20 minutes that much, but besides that, it was just a likable movie. It was pretty sweet. And the dog and the boy relationship is something that's been done in storytelling for like a long time. So it was cool to see it done with a new type of animal.
Yeah. Number 8 for me was Incredibles 2. Just because I loved The Incredibles, the first one, and just visiting that world, and I know that it had a lot of hype and it had a lot to live up to, and I felt like it fulfilled in a lot of the promises. It wasn't, as you guys said, I mean, definitely was nowhere close to as good as Incredibles, but I still was entertained. I still loved it, so that was my number 8.
My number 8 was Zootopia, and I really like this movie because I didn't see it when it came out, but I remember seeing it the first time, and it's very cool how they build out an entire world that's inhabited by humanoid-like animals, but they also, I feel like they address a lot of topics in there, and I like when a kid's movie can do it subtly, so it doesn't look like they're trying to teach you a lesson, but it's something where the adults can watch it and be, that was a really profound thing they just said there. So that, and I would actually, I think I would switch it with another one on my list, but I feel like it's a pretty solid 8.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so number 8, I have Inside Out. When any movie at all tries to address emotions and kind of simplify it, it fails because emotions are complex. They're not something that can be quantified. And even though in this movie it's done in a very simplistic way that's understandable for kids, it's just really charming. The voice cast is all good. Each emotion feels very personalized and alive. And more than that, I think the ideas of growing up, creativity, imagination that are brought throughout the movie are just really engaging. And there's something that, but I've seen this movie twice. Both times I watched it, I felt different ways about it. And that's, I think, the mark of a good animated movie is to be able to kind of bring a certain sense of childhood to the viewer. And also, they had such an emotional death with Bing Bong, the imaginary elephant guy. That was solid. And it's just like a fun movie to watch because in a lot of the scenes in this movie, it's being pretty dark, at least for a kid's movie, and sometimes even depressing. But if you look through that, you can find a lot of just creative kind of design for the world it's in, even if it's kind of drowned out through the depressive kind of nature of the story.
Number 7 for me was Toy Story 4, which, as you can tell, I like the Toy Story series a lot. Toy Story 4 was it was a movie that I didn't think I would want to see. In terms of I was like, oh, they're gonna ruin the franchise. Please don't make another one. And then when they made it and I watched it, I was happy that I saw it, and I was happy that they continued on, and I think that was the perfect ending for it. So I definitely think it does rank higher for me than 3 does, just because I think it hit the landing better.
For me, my number 7 would be Big Hero 6. I actually really like this movie. I felt like it combined a lot of interesting ideas and concepts. There was this idea of like the robot and kind of being sentient because he's still a robot. I like the animation style. I thought it had a really cool Japanese flair to it. Almost like what they were battling the robots, and I think it had a really cool message to it. And again, it pulled on my heartstrings a little bit near the end of the movie, and it had to be on my list. Okay. So I'm happy with its position there.
I'm mad at that.
At my number 7, I have probably the most bizarre movie on my list, which is Rango, Nickelodeon movie with Johnny Depp, directed by Gore Verbinski, it's just a weird movie, but it's just so bizarre, and I just love it. It's
kind of funny too, though. Johnny Depp
it's such just a creative movie. The cast all does a really good job. It feels like one of the more mature movies on this list, not in its subject matter, but in its presentation. Like, there's not really cursing or blood, but like, there's parts where you can see it and say like Disney wouldn't have the courage to do that, and I respected that in this movie. Johnny Depp definitely brings his Deppisms. Somebody else probably would mess up the role of Rango, but he brings his certain eccentricities to the role, and I just really enjoyed that. This movie, kind of even the fact that it exists, but more the fact that this movie is really never homaging any westerns. Like, a lot of western movies try to replicate stuff from the 60s and like do the spaghetti western style, but this movie is just kind of doing its own weird thing, and I really like that in this movie.
Nice. Number 6 for me is a movie that I didn't even really want to see, and once I saw it, I was so happy that I saw it because it tugged at my heartstrings, and it was very emotional to me, and that's Inside Out, which I know you mentioned it earlier. It's just there's very few animated movies that hit me by surprise in that way, and really, it really wasn't like a kids movie in a way, but I love that about it. It was like it was speaking to me in that way, the inner kid in me, and so it had to be in there, and so it's my number 6.
Number 6 for me is a movie that, and I struggled with this because I really wanted to put Frozen somewhere in my list, but after rewatching it recently, I kind of felt like it didn't stand up.
It didn't stand up.
But Brave is one of my favorite like modern Disney movies because I like the Irish Celtic culture they have going on. The music is some of my favorite almost of any Disney, which I really like. And I think the story having a strong female lead and how she's saving her family and everybody in it, I really enjoyed it, and I think that's my number 6 right there.
Yeah, so number 6 for me is Zootopia. Though I do disagree with you on subtlety, because it's pretty obviously just like, racism is bad,
But it can also be speciesism, is what I'm saying. Like, there's a little vagueness there.
I mean, no, because it's like they're animals, and they're like, but humans do the same thing as us. It's pretty obvious, in my opinion. But even though its message is pretty obvious, it's still a sweet message. But more than that, I just enjoy this movie. It makes me laugh more than most animated movies, because even the animated movies that I like never really just make me genuinely laugh. But this movie was extremely funny. It has a lot of good jokes. The sloth joke was great. The Godfather reference. There's a Breaking Bad reference. I'm not gonna say it's an adult movie, but it has some really adult ideas brought up in it. And like I said, there's some but adult jokes that kids just won't get. And, I've watched this movie at 2 different points in my life, and both times I laughed at different things differently. And I think that's the mark of a great animated movie. But more than that, the cast is really good. And it's just kind of a movie that you can watch and not have to think too hard. And if you did think too hard, you'd still enjoy the movie. So it's simple, but I really like Zootopia.
Nice.
Top 5s.
Number 5 for me, this was an easy one. This was COCO. I think definitely in terms of introducing a culture to, general audience, I think it did such an incredible idea. I went to see it because everyone said to go see it. COCO's, great. And so I went in with very high expectations, and it met my expectations. Definitely, 100%. It's a movie that I will definitely be showing Taylor in that way, but not now, obviously. But it's just an amazing movie, and I can be confident that if any of you guys want to see it, you're going to enjoy it.
Coco's actually one of my honorable mentions, and I felt bad not having it on
Yeah.
there. But there's so many, like my top 5. I'm proud of my top 5.
All right.
But I agree with what you said about Coco and
Yeah.
the culture thing. My number 5 is Toy Story 4, and I agree. I would say after 2, they shouldn't have made 3, and then they impressed me with 3, and then after 3, I was like, come on, leave it at 3.
Yeah.
Don't hit me with 4. I love 4. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I feel like cartoon movies are now starting to deal with more adult things, so kids can kind of prepare for it. And I feel like the way they ended the Toy Story 4 with the gang kind of separating and Woody going his own way, maybe they're setting up for Toy Story 5. Hopefully they are. But I just felt like it was a really emotional ending, and I really liked it.
Definitely was.
So number 5, I have a movie that I feel like a lot of people loved when it first came out, and everybody was praising it, and then just ceased to talk about it, which was the Lego Batman movie. I think this is genuinely by far the funniest movie I have on this list. There's no animated movie I think I've ever seen that has made me laugh more than this movie. Maybe it's because I like Batman, but I think it's because this movie is brilliantly written. It's got some great voice acting, but its strength really relies in its just constantly referential humor. It's always making references to old Batman stuff and comic books and the world of Gotham, and it's got one of the funniest opening scenes of any animated movie. It's got one of the funniest endings of any animated movie, and it's just one of those things that never fails to make you laugh, but it also feels, specifically Batman, because Batman's been a character who's been getting cinematically remade since like the 80s, and a lot of people have said you need to take a break. A lot of people have said no, keep doing it because he's Batman. And this movie is just like, I don't really care about any of that. I'm just going to tell this really simple but extremely funny and charming, story with Batman and go through his character a little bit. And overall, I don't know, I just had a great time with this movie. I've seen it like twice, and it's like probably the only animated movie I actually went to the theaters twice to see, because I was like, I have to watch it again. And it gave me such a great experience.
Yeah. Number 4 for me is a movie that basically, when they have an IP and they know exactly how to service decades of that. And so it might seem like I'm piggybacking you, BG, but I had that for number 4, the Lego Batman movie, because the humor and just knowing that there was a Batman TV show, there was a Batman animated show, it's like, and it encompassed all of that. And I also am a Batman fan, so maybe that's why I liked it so much. But at the same time, it was laugh out loud in that way, and it's hard for me to do that with animation, but especially Legos. But it was incredible. So yeah.
My number 4 is Sing, and I really like this movie because I felt it followed so many different stories, but efficiently. Like, I didn't feel like we were stretched too thin. The gorilla had a story very similar to the Billy Elliot, where his dad wanted him to be kind of rough, but he wanted to sing. They had the rat doing like the Frank Sinatra, and the way that they had the animals picking the songs, it was just so perfectly matched, and the performance at the end. And this wasn't, they definitely tried to, insert some type of meaning underneath it, like follow your dreams or something like that. But this was just a really feel-good movie. I enjoyed watching it. I would watch it again. And this is definitely a solid number for me.
Yeah, so for number 4 for me, I also have a movie where I feel like the company understood the IP and the decades of it, because I have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I only edged out Lego Batman just because I feel like it had a little bit more of an emotional punch and a sort of identity that very few animated movies lack, or very few animated movies have, because any movie that is trying to be Into the Spider-Verse will be labeled as trying to be Into the Spider-Verse, and most movies can't create that type of identity for themselves. It's an extremely well voice acted movie. I think they just did a great job casting everybody. They're all pretty likable. But more than that, it feels like it respects Spider-Man. And for a company like Sony, which has been hated on a lot for what it's done to the character of Spider-Man throughout some of its business practices, that was a great move for them. It was a movie that I think if you're a Spider-Man fan, similar to the Lego Batman movie, if you watched it and you like the character and the history and what it means to you, it's really something that's going to connect with you. It feels like every frame of the movie has love poured into it. The animation was awesome, And it was just one of those movies that I walked out of feeling genuinely just like I wanted to smile, you know? It was like, it wasn't a feel-good movie like Sing necessarily, but it was the type of movie that if you like something and you watch it and you really feel like they respected what you love, and that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're into our top threes now. My top three, I think it was one of your honorable mentions, but it had to be Wreck-It Ralph for me. I told you, I've talked many times about the 80s and the decades and all that stuff, and arcades for me is just everything. It was always everything, and it was like going through my childhood watching Wreck-It Ralph and just all the inside jokes and the characters and stuff, to the point where the second one, you know, Ralph Breaks the Internet, wasn't as funny to me, but
it was more my generation.
Yeah, your generation. But I mean, Wreck-It Ralph was home run, and I just everything about it, it was from the point of view of a bad person trying to be good, you know. So it was I just really enjoyed it, and it had to be my top three. I kept fluxing, but I was like, this is my number three.
Number three for me is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I was actually really against watching this movie because I was not very happy with The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. And I felt like Sony was just going to ruin it. I'm not going to waste my time with the cartoon, but a friend of mine convinced me to watch it, and I really liked it. I actually would argue that I feel like it is almost a feel-good movie as well as a superhero movie, because the soundtrack they have, I don't even know what the name of the song is. I'm not a fan of it, and I'm not going to sing it to tell you guys it either, but I felt like it definitely had a positive vibe to it. I liked the animation choice of it.
Yeah.
I feel like it fit the multiverse storytelling, and it allowed to switch back and forth. I liked how we got to see multiple versions of Spider-Man too, which is, you know, I like Spider-Man, so I thought that was fun. And yeah, I agree with what BG said. It was, you know, you left feeling happy.
Yeah, so my number three is pretty much everything that Spider-Verse is not. It's extremely cynical, dark, and gritty. And I feel like in a decade where we, you know, celebrate so many of these theatrically released movies by these big companies, I should celebrate what DC has been doing, which has been releasing home movies that are almost as good as some of the theatrical ones at like an extremely fast rate. They've been cranking out like 2 or 3 a year for like the whole decade. Yeah. And if I had to pick just one that was the best, it would be The Dark Knight Returns, which is, I'm including both parts because you can buy a version of the movie. That's just one part. I mean, if you've read the comic book for this, you've pretty much seen the movie, because the movie's a lot of the same lines and even panels and frames and shots, pretty much verbatim. But through that, it gets to use voice actors and give more fluidity to the storytelling. And you get a lot more liberty, too, I think, creatively when you do, you know, an actual physical telling of the story, because the comic book, at the end of the day, is only breaking down by pictures. Peter Weller is like probably the second best animated Batman. He's like extremely good. The movie never really, like, ever, and it probably should maybe one time, like, tone down some of the stuff because there's some stuff in here, you know. It's very Frank Miller, but it's just one of those movies I love. The action is truly fantastic. The mud hole scene, the scene versus Superman, the scene where he comes back, they're all such fun action sequences. They're so good to the point where I show people who don't like animation them, and they still like those sequences just because of how well done they are. The subject matter is super good, even though it's super dark. The characterization of Batman's great, and I'm not gonna really talk about it too much because if you read the comic if you read the comic, you pretty much know the whole movie. And yeah, I would recommend going to see it because you can buy it anywhere, and it's just fantastic.
Nice. Okay.
Top two.
Number two for me is one that has already been mentioned, and that was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. For me, it completely surprised me. I had no faith in another Spider-Man movie unless Marvel was doing it. And I was proven wrong by Sony. And just an incredible story. Didn't know anything really about the multiverse Spider-Mans. You know, I didn't follow the comics in that way. And I was pleasantly surprised by it, and I love the idea of a cynical Spider-Man. You know, it had to be my number two only because I'm going off impact and would I see it again, animation style, 100% I would see it again. It was groundbreaking.
Number two for me and number one are actually, I go back and forth switch before them, but I feel like for number two for me, it's Kung Fu Panda 3. And the reason why is I think this is probably one of the greatest cartoons I've ever seen. because it's Jack Black. It's funny. It's comedy. I love 1, 2, and 3. I like 3 the best, 1 second, and 2 is my least favorite. But I feel like it deals with spiritual and philosophical discussions about energy and all this other stuff in a way that makes you almost like you're kind of thinking about it when you leave the theater. And I really like this movie about that. I love the music, the animation and stuff. So it's definitely got to be my second for sure. It was very good.
Yeah, so speaking of great trilogies, my second is Toy Story 3. My top 2 are also interchangeable. I edged my number 1 out a little more. I'll talk about that later. But Toy Story 3 is fantastic. Lotso Huckenbear is one of the great villains of Pixar. I mean, the guy he's intimidating. And the story itself is great, but more than that, it feels like a movie that knows its audience better than anybody, because it knows that people who watched the first 2 Toy Stories in theaters or just grew up on them are not going to be the same kids. They're not going to be just needing a basic story like the first 2, which I feel are significantly less emotionally mature than this movie. I feel like this movie knows that it can go a little deeper. I'm not going to say darker, but truly it goes into the feeling of being lost and being forgotten and leaving people you care about. And I don't think any movie this decade has had more of a profound emotional impact. And, this one came out pretty early in the decade, but still, I think that there was yet a film to top this in terms of just being able to really resonate with its audience. And it did it with a bunch of toys. People still talk about that scene where, they're all in circle, holding hands. People still talk about, some of the comedic stuff in this movie. It's also really funny. And it's just, I think it's an animation masterpiece to me.
Nice. Well, my number 1 was not even a debate for me. It's probably a movie that you guys probably haven't even seen. It's called Your Name, and it's a Japanese animation movie.
Damn, man, that kind of ruins the reveal for me because I have never heard of that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's one of those movies that when it came out, there was talks for Best Picture in terms of, and that's hard to do when you're animation, especially a foreign animation movie. But I don't want to say too much about it because I know it's a movie that a lot of people haven't seen, but the heart that's put into this movie and the magic that's put into it, it's the top creme de la creme of what Japanese animation can be. I'm a big Japanese animation fan, and if someone said, well, what is it all about? I'd say watch this movie.
So my number 1 is Toy Story 3 for all the reasons BG just said. And the reason why I felt like it was interchangeable with Kung Fu Panda is because I agree. They knew who they were talking to, that the kids would have been grown up, but they probably also may have been watching it with their kids. And I felt like where Kung Fu Panda was talking about metaphysical stuff, Toy Story 3 was talking about relationships with people in like the mundane world and kind of how to find your place in there. And even that scene where they were all holding hands and they thought they were about to die, that always gets them, even if I'm thinking about it. So truthfully, it's probably one of my favorite cartoon movies I've ever seen.
Nice.
Yeah, so me and Prince actually have a pretty similar top 2. My number 1 is Kung Fu Panda 2.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to say full disclosure.
2? Really?
Kung Fu
3?
Panda 1 is my favorite animated movie of all time. I've watched it probably 25 times. I love it. It's a true masterpiece. It's an 11 out of 10. It's 12 out of 10. And Kung Fu Panda 2 is one of those films that really had a lot riding on it to just succeed, and it did it in spades. I think that Kung Fu Panda, this is the most controversial thing I will say on this channel, at least up to this point, is that the Kung Fu Panda trilogy is the best animated trilogy of all time over Toy Story. And I'll tell you why. Because the way they build Poe's character with each movie, from him dealing with physical challenges to mental ones, and then the final third one, spiritual ones, is so brilliant. And in this movie, the way they deal with the idea of just kind of overcoming your own personal demons and some of your grief and some of your struggles and insecurities is done so brilliantly. Shen is a fantastic villain. The action's really good. The final, 20 minutes or something, and when he starts getting the cannonballs with the inner piece, never fails to give me chills. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. The animation is gorgeous. It's still some of the best out of any DreamWorks movie. And it's just one of those movies that I can always watch, and I'll never not love it. It's just such a fantastic sequel to the first one. It's everything a sequel should be. It continues with the first one. at every possible level, but it adds things, but it never takes away from the charm. And those types of comments you hear on reviews for movies like, Dark Knight and Empire Strikes Back. And I'm putting Kung Fu Panda 2 up there with those movies in terms of being able to be a perfectly made sequel to a film that was pretty much perfect in its own right.
Nice.
I'm trying to think about which one I like more,
Yeah.
Toy Story or Kung Fu Panda, because it's a controversial saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I know a lot of people disagree. I just think the way they build it, and 3 was, I'm not gonna say a disappointment, but I think I rewatched it pretty recently and I just liked it a little less, but it's still a great movie. But 2 is just, it's my favorite. It was pretty much, when I was making this list, like a guarantee for my number 1. And when I was getting to the top, I was like, oh, we'll see. And then once I was there, I was just thinking about the impact this movie had on me from the first time I saw it in 2011 to the time I watched it recently. It's a masterpiece. I love this movie.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
the reason I'm so quiet is I actually have never seen any of them.
No, you should see the Kung Fu
So
Pandas.
I know.
They're
I'm actually looking forward to it the way that you guys are talking about it. I don't know. I've not
You've
seen
never
one.
seen any of them?
I've never seen any
He
of
just
them.
had a kid, man. Now he's gonna have to get into it.
It's on my list now.
Yeah, it should be. It definitely should be. But anyways, that's our top animated movies for the decade. Let us know what you think. Who had the better list? Because I felt like mine was pretty solid.
I'm not that confident with my list.
We'll
I left
see.
out Kung Fu Panda. So.
But don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you. We'll see you next time.